Hey, welcome back to Leading Edge. Good to have you with us. You may have seen this week that the U.S. Justice Department is suing the state of Texas over its latest redrawing of voting districts, alleging that the plan would make votes cast by Blacks and Latinos count for less than other votes. Hey, it's Texas. Would you expect anything less? But I hope we would expect more here in Ohio. But the recent redraw of congressional and state legislative districts is also under fire. Numerous lawsuits have been filed against the new Ohio districts, which clearly don't accomplish what a voter-approved constitutional amendment was designed to produce: bipartisan, non-gerrymandered districts that would stand for a decade. But Buckeye legislative strongmen are not taking these suits lying down. In fact, they have reached beyond the Ohio Attorney General's office to bring in the big guns, the lawyers, the big guns of legislative redistricting litigation. It's something that was investigated and written about this week in the Ohio Capital Journal. Jake Zuckerman reported the story. I was intrigued by it. I asked him to join me here on Leading Edge. So House Speaker Bob Cupp, Jake, good to see you, by the way. Speaker Bob Cupp, Senate President Matt Huffman, both from Lima, looked toward North Carolina in choosing their legal counsel. And hey, they got folks who have made a name in this arena of redistricting, haven't they?
Yeah, they have. They've actually been to the Supreme Court before, or their case has been to the Supreme Court defending North Carolina's map, which was later overturned. There were a couple of suits that kind of wormed their way through the courts, but ultimately the Supreme Court determined it to be a racist gerrymander.
All right, let's get into this a little bit more specifically. So these guys, these attorneys who just this week, what was it, Wednesday of this week, argued before the Ohio Supreme Court on state legislative districts. That's your local state house. That's your local state senator, folks. So we're together on this. Let's go back 10 years, because we do this redistricting every 10 years based on census. These guys are defending North Carolina over its redistricting 10 years ago, and also a challenge to a 2013 law down there, a voter restriction law. Now, these things, let's face it, are in court for years, but finally a federal court panel ruled, and its opinion is almost chilling for what these measures were trying to do to North Carolina voters, or at least some of them. The judges said what about those maps, Jake?
The judges determined the maps to be racial gerrymanders. So basically, they said that the legislature improperly considered and factored in race when deciding what these district lines look like, so in practice, that kind of means, for one, we're talking about Black voters.
Yeah.
And it's either stuffing so many Black voters into one district that, sure, they win that district, but the power of that Black vote is diluted elsewhere on the map. Ultimately, the Supreme Court case came down to 2 congressional districts down there. Or it can mean spreading out the Black vote enough so that the power in the voting block itself is spread out over enough districts that it's diluted. So it all comes down to dilution of voting power, essentially.
And those very allegations are flying around in Columbia over what has happened here in Ohio this year, now 10 years later, right?
That's correct right now. I mean, I think that the state courts are a little more focused on partisan gerrymanders, but race is just proxy for partisan politics right now, especially when you look at some of the urban-rural divides. I think it's pretty safe to say that race is really, if not at the center of these issues, it's right in the mix.
Jake Zuckerman, my guest, he writes for the Ohio Capital Journal out of Columbus, part of the state's newsroom network, really around the country. They report state news, and they do so without selling advertisements. They're not beholden to anybody. They live on grants and donations. I want to get back to, in a similar lawsuit over 2 majority Black congressional districts down there, and you alluded to this, Jake, the U.S. Supreme Court got involved and remind us, and again, these measures were defended by the 2 attorneys who this week here in Ohio are defending the recent redistricting in Ohio. The U.S. Supreme Court got involved and said what?
Well, the Supreme Court said that the maps were racial gerrymanders, and when they looked at the voter ID law, which the state also passed, which restricted early voting, souls to the polls voting, which is really popular with Black churches in the area.
Sure.
A couple other, voting same-day voter registrations. You can go to the polls, register to vote, and then cast your ballot. Basically, in these 2 separate cases, the Supreme Court both deemed them to be an improper use of race in politics, and they said specifically the voter ID law that it targeted black voters with almost surgical precision. Direct quote from the court. So when
This
you
was
look
a
at
federal court that said these measures with surgical precision. Their words went in and used race as part of this. And the guys who defended what was done in North Carolina are on the payroll. Do we know who's paying them, by the way? Somebody asked me and I said, I don't know. I'll ask Jake.
that would be the taxpayers.
That would be the taxpayers. Okay. They're in Ohio defending our recent districts. One of them, President Trump, tried to get to serve as a federal judge down in North Carolina. How'd that work out?
It actually did not work out well for him. As if you remember from the Trump years, the Senate was historic in its just churn of confirming and confirming and confirming Trump justices. A good number of them were ultimately confirmed in the judiciary, were deemed unqualified by the American Bar Association, and still made it on. But Thomas Farr, who is one of the state of Ohio's attorneys now in redistricting, his nomination actually sank, and it comes down to there was a U.S. Senator named Jesse Helms, who was kind of infamous in the Strom Thurmond era of the U.S. Senate.
Right.
And in his campaigns, he had a young Thomas Farr working in his council on the campaigns, and he sent out mailers to about 124,000 black voters in North Carolina. And basically they targeted these voters who had recently moved, and this mailer all but implied if you screw up voting in some sort of clerical way, you can go to jail for it. You can be prosecuted. I mean, it was just like pretty plain-faced racist politics.
Misinformation. In some cases, it told people you're not registered, you can't vote, all that kind of stuff. That was part of a Helms campaign, obviously to suppress a voting bloc out there that he knew wasn't going to vote for him. And this guy was part and parcel of that?
Yes, he was representing the campaign. He has claimed that he did not know about the mailing scheme, and I think that's in dispute. But in any event, the U.S. Department of Justice ultimately settled with the campaign on the violation and entered a consent decree agreement. But they produced this memo back in 1991. And when Thomas Farr was going through the confirmation process in the Senate, there was already a lot of stir. Everyone knew that he had defended North Carolina's maps that were said to be racial gerrymanders. People knew that he had defended this voter ID law that was determined to be enacted with surgical precision. And then this memo drops, and one U.S. Senator, Tim Scott, who is the only black Republican in the Senate caucus,
right,
he withdrew his support, and he has made some media comments to the effect of like the Republican Party is just not avoiding these. He used the term potholes. We're not avoiding these potholes of race in American politics right now.
And once he withdrew support, it pretty much tanked the whole nomination.
Right. And Jeff Flake, if you remember him, had also said he wouldn't vote for nominees. That was almost unrelated.
Yeah.
Far on the merits. There was some political trauma at the time.
But Jake Zuckerman, my guest from the Ohio Capital Journal. And we're going to wrap it up here in a minute and a half or so. What are, if anything, Ohio legislative leaders saying about this history, the tactics, the character of the lawyers who are carrying their banner to war in the courts in Ohio?
Right. Well, they didn't answer. I sent them a list of comments, both Speaker Cupp and Senate President Huffman. They didn't want to answer the questions. Thomas Farr declined to comment, and Mr. Strzok didn't respond. But I mean, I think one point that's worth making is, for one, everyone deserves a good lawyer. It's not that anyone doesn't.
That's right.
Counsel, and lawyers defend stuff that they don't necessarily believe. It's not to ascribe these maps necessarily to Farr, Philip Strzok. But the fact is, this is like this very well-documented history, and it's kind of an ugly history behind them. And Cupp and Huffman made this very active and very deliberate choice to seek these guys out. Yeah. So I think you asked just the right question.
Yeah.
Why were these people chosen?
Yeah. Yeah. And I do want to echo and support what Jake just said there. Folks, if any of us is charged with murder, we are absolutely due an active and aggressive defense. And I have never suggested that a defense attorney out there doing his job supports murder. Okay. So I want to make sure I'm not saying these guys are the racist people because of what they were defending. They were doing their job. I just find it very interesting that those records, those decisions are on the record and they're on the payroll. And Jake Zuckerman reporting, you and I are paying the tariff. Jake Zuckerman, by the way, folks, I've been following this closely. And I'll be talking to Jake in the year ahead about midterms, but nobody, you guys got to see his coverage of the pandemic in Ohio from the Capitol, the legislative point of view, and you can at ohiocapitaljournal.com. Jake, always good to see you. We'll talk midterms next year. We may talk again a time or two. In the meantime, be well.
Yeah, likewise.
Happy holidays to you, and I'll be back right after this.